Brush by Per Calders. The day that Turco, a little pistol of a pup, ate Senor Sala's hat, Senora Sala decided that enough was enough and that it would take the patience of a saint to put up with this mischief any longer. So she got the whole family together and asked each member their opinion of the situation. It was decided that the gardener's daughter would take Turco and keep him in her house. Little Sala was so sad he thought he'd die. To him, it seemed there was no way to go on living without his little pup. After he stopped crying, however, he realized he had to fill the emptiness left by Turco's absence. First, he tried to imagine his aunt's canary as a companion, but the number of really fun things he could do with the bird were so few, he immediately knew they could never be close friends. Then he imagined that the floor lamp in the library was a faithful soldier. For nearly 2 hours, he thought he had solved his problem. But soon it was clear that he still longed for his beloved Turco. He tried to create a lasting friendship with a canvas ball, with a ball of string, with an American-made spinning top, with a new flower in the garden, and then with a long cane which had been the envy of all his friends. But he discovered that however brave he tried to be, he could not overcome his loneliness, and that the difference between all those things and a dog was so great that it was impossible to forget Turco. He knew that what he needed was to find a substitute for Turco, something that could take the dog's place, yet not destroy his memory. Sala went through the house from top to bottom, turning the closets and drawers inside out, and finally, in a corner of the attic, he found a very big brush, one that was no longer in style and had been banished forever from the family broom closet. He closed his eyes and passed his hand over its bristles. He had the definite impression he was petting a dog. In fact, this first encounter felt so good that little Sala decided not to search any further. He tied the brush to some string, and in less than 5 minutes was no longer even aware he was dragging a brush behind him. Rather, he believed Brush was a dog of rare pedigree who was following him all over the house. By evening, little Sala was tired from trailing his new friend around and went to lie down. Before getting into bed, he tied Brush to a chair. But no sooner had he tied it up when he was overcome by a wave of tenderness. He couldn't help thinking of how tame and gentle Brush was, and how willing it was to play all sorts of games. The idea that Brush would spend the night tied up sleeping on the cold floor made him feel bad. So he jumped down, untied Brush, and took it into bed with him. Soon, little Sala noticed that the brush was warm and was snuggling up against him for a hug. This, naturally, was very serious, because it's one thing to pretend to change a brush into a dog, but it's another thing if the change really happens. Little Sala got up, turned on the light, and was astonished to see that the brush, though it still looked exactly like a brush, was moving around like a dog. It turned a few somersaults and then showed its stomach to be scratched. Anyone watching this would have wondered how a brush that still looked like a brush could have paws to move about on and a stomach to scratch. But once the problem of giving life to the brush had been solved, such details didn't matter and weren't worth worrying about. That's what little Sala thought, and right away he wanted to tell his parents about the marvelous event. But he knew better than to wake his parents in the middle of the night, and decided to wait until the next morning. Of course, he couldn't sleep all night, and very early, as soon as he heard his mother up and about, he went downstairs with Brush under his arms. "Look, Mama," he said, "I found a brush that is really a dog. It moves, knows my voice, and has fleas." Without interrupting her chores, his mother looked at him and said, "Don't be silly and get rid of that piece of junk. You're old enough to be a little more sensible." Little Sala was hurt and thought again about how grown-ups acted like they knew it all, yet did many foolish things themselves. He said nothing more, brought Brush to his room, and thought that if they didn't want to believe him, it didn't matter. They'd be the losers. At dinner, his mother jokingly told about little Sala's discovery, and his father laughed as though it were the craziest thing in the world. Little Sala didn't say anything because he knew that ultimately justice prevails. Sooner or later, he knew his family would realize that some things aren't what they seem and shouldn't be laughed at. The next night, he was awakened by Brush's howling. He heard the sounds of a struggle coming from the library and his father calling for help. Brush, looking strangely worried, poked at the door. Little Sala opened the door, tiptoed down the stairs, and saw his father fighting with a burglar who was stronger than he was and who was about to hit him on the head with a fire iron. "Get him, Brush! Bite him!" he cried. Brush ran like the wind and hurled himself at the burglar and bit him on the leg. The burglar was so surprised by the ferociousness of such a thing that he immediately gave up and was handed over to the police tied hand and foot. A little later, his mother, with tears in her eyes, promised she would never again doubt her son's word, and his father, passing his hand over Brush's bristles, said, "We'll make a house for you in the garden with all the latest conveniences, and above the door we'll have painted, 'We're not sure that it's alive, but it deserves to be.'" The end.